Lola and I have been together for more than 20 years, right? Married 19 years, and we're now more than a decade beyond a marriage crisis that was serious enough to lead to a divorce petition. Yes, a divorce was actually filed. And one of the hardest parts about that crisis was not simply hearing that the marriage was over. It was living through a period where Lola and I had emotionally shut down, yet we were still under the same roof, still sharing parts of our lives together. And I could not understand, a lot of time, I couldn't understand why the situation looked final and unfinished at the same time. At one point, I packed a bag, drove 10 minutes to my parents' place, and sat outside for almost 2 hours trying to understand how my marriage had reached that point. I thought my biggest problem was Lola's decision or indecision. It was something deeper than that. It wasn't the decision anyway. And something happening inside of me was giving her indecision control over my emotional condition. And I later saw the same deeper pattern in clients whose lives looked strong on the surface, from the outside, but their emotional security quietly became centered on what their partner did day after day. So I'm going to come back to one specific client, to what she discovered, because it changed the way she thought about being stuck in what we call a marriage limbo, right? Or in a separation limbo. You see, research supports that this state of confusion here, right? It feels destabilizing, right? And there was a national study actually, of around about 3,000 married couples, founding the findings was, basically, the thoughts about divorce were dynamic rather than automatically final. So we're talking about the thoughts, right? Which obviously in itself creates confusion. And among people thinking about divorce at the first measurement, 31% were no longer thinking about it 1 year later. So what does this tell us? Wait, before I tell you what that tells us, another study of what they call ambiguous marital separation found that people repeatedly described the experience as being in limbo, right? That means uncertainty, right? And now, with uncertainty about whether the marriage would end or continue, and most participants, and they said separation itself had not created the clarity they expected, because oftentimes we like, just separate, and somehow that should be the automatic answer. Nobody wants to be separated, of course, but sometimes you come to this almost conclusion that maybe that's what you need. But anyway, today I want to show you the four mistakes, right? The four mistakes I fell into, this mistake, the four mistakes that makes your wife's indecision become your powerlessness, and how to save your marriage without begging for a verdict, because that in itself is a problem, and without forcing a timeline, because I understand naturally you want to know where we're going with this, right? And you don't want to put your life on hold anymore. And by the way, you still want to save your marriage, right? So we're going to unpack the decision limbo cycle, right? So powerlessness would lead to waiting. Let me draw this out completely. It will lead into waiting. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. All right. Powerlessness will lead to waiting. It will lead to interpretations. All right. Interpretations. This type of interpretations are not necessarily good, right? Let me put this back here. Okay. And that will lead to pressuring. Pressuring is something you want to pay attention to, because once you enter the zone of pressurizing, especially without the intention to pressurize, because if you knew that you were pressurizing another person, you wouldn't do it, right? So it's often coming from a very subconscious place. But once you understand the cycle I'm about to share with you, you will be able to avoid it easily, right? Pressuring will lead to shrinking. Shrinking. What happened to your identity? What happened to the confidence? What happened, right? Shrinking leads right back to, well, not the same powerlessness, like a bigger version of it. So you get stuck in, this is the exact cycle I want to unpack today. This is why you feel stuck in a limbo. If you're in a place where your wife has decided that they want out, your husband, it could be your husband as well, they've decided they don't want to be in the marriage anymore, but you're stuck in a limbo because they would not file. Like you feel like you're living in darkness, essentially, right? So, and of course, you don't want them to file, but you're not sure if they're going to file, right? So, it's really going to lead right back to powerlessness, unfortunately. Now, before we dive into today's breakdown, if your marriage is actively in a crisis state right now, your wife says she wants a divorce, but she has not filed, she hasn't left, or given you a clear direction, and you cannot afford to wait for me to do this unpacking right now today to figure out piece by piece, just simply go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. Go there right now and book a one-on-one discovery session with me so we can map out your exact scenario privately. All right. So the pain of being in a divorce limbo is not simply that the wife has not decided. The deeper pain is that you gradually start behaving as though you cannot move emotionally until she does something emotional, until she comes to a place of stability herself. And that is how uncertainty becomes your powerlessness. So I want to spend a little bit, just give me about 5 minutes. I want to spend some time here to unpack this, right? So it's triggered by powerlessness, right? You feel powerless, you feel uncertain, and as you know, certainty is a human basic need, right? So what happens? The number one mistake you're going to make in this place is putting your life on her timeline. Let me put that right now on the board. Putting your life on her timeline. Putting your life on her timeline. All right, let's unpack this. What does this mean? Okay, I get it. You want to save your marriage. Okay, when you do this, you reduce the chances of saving your marriage. It actually gets worse, right? Why? Because you go from powerlessness to waiting, right? You go from powerlessness to waiting. You're waiting for her to file. You're waiting for the conversation, right? Because somebody told you, like, if you just had conversation, well, they forgot that there's another human being involved. They have to kind of want to have the conversation. But wait, before we get to her, you kind of have to know how to initiate conversation, sustain yourself, have a healthy conversation, facilitate a healthy conversation, know where to back off so that it doesn't turn into a match of arguments between two people, which is often what it turns out to. And so, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's a hard conversation. Well, if there was nothing wrong with it, you probably won't be on this video. But but bottom line is that you're waiting. You're waiting for the conversation. You're waiting for her mood to change. See, I just said something, but now we're now. It's easier said than done. Is the point I'm making, right? You're waiting for her mood to change because you heard from me. The timing is everything when it's time to have a conversation, and it's true, right? But this kind of place can become a very confusing state. You're waiting for her to say she wants the marriage again. You tell yourself you're being patient, which you should be patient, right? But at what point does patience become you're becoming a doormat and somebody's walking all over you or thinking they can just put your life in a limbo? Well, no, it was the marriage in a limbo. No, your life in a limbo, right? Because now it's not like you have a choice. You're stuck with them with children, but they're not sure. They want to find themselves first. Your wife wants to find herself first. If you could just be patient with me. For how long are you going to be patient? Right? And fear has turned your patience into suspension. Because if you're being patient from a place of fear because you're afraid you're going to lose her, you probably will end up losing her. Not just her, you're going to lose the quality of your life. That's the worst part about all of this. Because honestly, let's be honest, you can find another wife. It's not that you can find another wife, but you don't want another wife. You want her, and there's nothing wrong with that because that's your wife after all, right? So your health, your work, your mission, your friendships, your other friendships, for crying out loud, as taken, they're suspended because you're actively trying to save. Now, this is the worst part, right? Your confidence. You no longer feel confident about yourself because for the first time in your life, it feels like failure, right? It feels like failure. So when you're moving from this place of panic and fear, now obviously emotional stability is out the window. Why am I describing this so accurately, right? Yeah, because I went through it. It happened to me. Okay, it happened to me. And Lola had shut down on our marriage while still remaining in the same house, in the same bed, right? Now, thank God, it's like we've done a whole decade after that, right? And I could not make sense out of it because I had never been in that position ever in my life. Me feeling rejected. It doesn't make it didn't. It created confusion at best because that's not who I am. Because even up to that moment, in terms of attention, in terms of people, just likability, in terms of at work, in my business, like this is easy for me. But when you have to end up in the same bed with the person who you love and they're confused, so because that confusion is passing over to you as anxiety, it's the worst state you can find yourself. And I kept asking myself, why somebody who was done, right? I mean, you love me, but you're done. Why would you still be physically present? Like, because when I do the back and forth, sometimes I flare off, right? Like, just like, if you don't want to be here, don't be here. And then I'm like, oh, please don't go, right? It's a state of confusion altogether, right? And I was trying to solve her internal state. What I didn't realize that a lot of it wasn't really about me. A lot, like a whole lot, right? A lot of it was about me. A lot of it was not about me, right? And I was trying to solve our internal states before I had to learn how to govern myself in this state of crisis, right? Why is it that I react the way that I react? Why is it that I couldn't contain myself, my self respect, my self love, my ability to care for myself? Why is it that I didn't have the capacity? Was more so that I was remember, this mistake here is putting your life on her timeline. I know you're supposed to be married to this person. So that's why it's easier said than done because, you know, it is easier said than done because there is a sweet spot somewhere in between. And that's what we're trying to discuss today, right? So you go from waiting to interpreting. We go from waiting to interpretations. What are you interpreting? See, at the end of the day, you have the power to interpret life events around you. Now, I don't know if you know how to use the power, okay? I don't know if you know how to interpret the power, but you do have the power to interpret the events of life around you. And that's going to also drive. So, as life events are happening, like for example, let's say your wife wants divorce, but she won't file. So you feel stuck in a place of limbo, right? So what happens, right? You start treating the inaction as a decision. Now, we're talking about marriage here. Not just that we're talking about marriage, we're talking about a romantic relationship, right? So one of the biggest mistakes you can make is treating her inaction, right? Meaning a moment of inaction, because what is inaction? Oftentimes a lot is happening underneath, right? And you can't see it, right? Which is why we put ourselves on hold. That's the same mistake. It's similar to mistake number one. You put your life on hold on her timeline because it seems like she's on hold. She's not making a decision. So you treat that inaction as a decision. Again, these are the easy things to do when you feel stuck in this place of limbo because you're actively looking for certainty. You're looking for answers. You're looking for guarantees. All right. When you start looking for guarantees, there's a big problem with that, right? So again, she has not filed. So you say, she must still want this. She must still want to be in the marriage, right? Because how long? How like you could take a quick 20 minutes, 30 minutes drive to the courthouse and just file the petition, pick up the phone, talk to a lawyer, whatever you need to do, right? She has not moved out, right? So you say she must be reconsidering, um, or you swing the extreme other way, right? If she loved me, she would have taken divorce off the table already. Why are we talking about divorce? Why are you threatening me with divorce, right? If you're gonna do it, just do it, right? So you start asking all those questions. All those questions, ordinarily, there's nothing wrong with them. You're looking just like the rest of us. You're looking for certainty. In other words, uh, you're looking for safety and security about the future, probably obsessively, right? You're probably obsessed over the past as well. What happens when you're obsessed over the past and you're obsessed about the future? You literally will abandon the present, this moment, right? And her lack of action in this moment now becomes even louder, right? And the reality is that it is not just the fact that she's not acting in this moment is not a reconciliation contract. It's not a proof of inevitable divorce either, right? This is literally life moving, right? It's moving. Like even if somebody is sitting still on a couch somewhere, right? Life is still moving, because you can't stop time, right? There's something called time decay. I'm not going to bring that too much into this conversation, but there's something called time decay, regardless of action or inaction. It's something you should learn, right? You should learn that the human mind is never really at still. You could be sleeping. Why is it that we go and start dreaming while we're asleep? Because the mind is almost never at rest. If you have a good sleep, you forgot about the dream, but there was a dream nonetheless, right? So divorce thinking can change over time. That's the reality. Over what? Over time. And research has found substantial movement toward less intense divorce thinking across a 1 year period. So if somebody is in a state of limbo, right, it's about knowing what to do with that time. It's not about forcing them to act or to decide and tell you what or give you certainty, right? You have to just trust. Time is not your mate. I say this all the time, right? So you mistake not having hope. You mistake that not having hope for on your side as it means is a verdict on the other side. That's a big mistake. Your mistake is forcing uncertainty to tell you something it has not told you. This must mean something. If you do this, it must mean something. So your interpretations about life events, including just time passing, is something you have to work on. So anyway, you start interpreting their inaction, you start interpreting it, and then the answers you come up with, interpretations you come up with, are usually the worst case scenario. Why? Because it's fear driven, it's panic driven. So your mind is playing tricks on you and it's telling you like it's got to be the worst case scenario. Well, if it was that simple, you would just go and file the divorce yourself, right? But it's not that simple either, because on one side you're being hopeful when you're being quiet, but when they're being quiet, your mind is thinking the worst case scenario. So there is uncertainty. It's confusing at best, right? So what do? You start to act out of fear, out of panic. You start to overreact. Even in a simple conversation, you predetermine what they're trying to tell you. You interject their statement in within them making a statement. You interject because your fear is doing the talking. It's a very tricky thing, but it's something you can actually build capacity around. It can be as simple as you just let them finish their thoughts and you're able to say, I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer for that. Let me think about that. Are you able to sit in that place of quietness? Why do you think people do meditation? Right? You think they're dumber, or why do you think some people are much more diplomatic? My wife and I were just having this conversation yesterday. Some people literally think being diplomatic means somebody is being disingenuous because they can't fathom the idea in their head, right? It could mean that, but it doesn't always mean that. Can your brain function in a way that can comprehend those two things at the same time? It's a lot of English. Guess what? Life is a complex place. Human experience is a complex thing. It's why we tell you don't act. I'm asking you, don't act like you have all the answers all the time, because that's the number one way you're going to miss it. So interpretations, your interpretation, which is usually the worst case scenario when you have panic and fear, is going to lead to you pressuring. It's going to lead you creating pressure on the other side. So mistake number 3 is turning every interaction into a decision meeting. So you have an opportunity to interact. Okay? Turning every interaction into a into a decision meeting. Okay, this is a mistake number 3 here. Let's see, let me move this down. Does this make sense? You have an opportunity every single day to interact with your husband or your wife who will not file a divorce. What do you do with that? You want to have a meeting about the marriage, right? That's what obsession does, right? Obsession comes from rejection, right? You feel rejected, you feel like you want to fix the marriage, like desperately right now, you must fix the marriage right now. So every interaction must be about, having the discussion, talk about it, right? You've been listening to the internet for too much. It's like watching too much an Hollywood movie, right? If you just talk about it, right, the problem will solve. No, it won't. If you don't know timing, if you don't know how to leverage quietness, silence is golden. Not all the time, obviously, right? But you have to know what you're doing, right? So once you become obsessed with what the delay means, depending on how much you're moving from a place of panic and fear, once you be, because it's obsession, right? You start trying to extract an answer. Are you still filing? Do you still want out, right? Are you in love with, are you still in love with me? How long are we going to live like this, right? You start having all these questions that are basically demonstrating why they're trying to run away from you in the first place. Like have you noticed I've changed in recent times? I've been working on myself. You start to explain, complain, defensiveness, and apologies in the same breath, even though you did nothing wrong, or you think you did nothing wrong. So they can feel it that your apologies are not authentic, right? Pressure. You're creating pressure. This is the climax. The more you do this, right, the worse it gets. It really gets really bad. Because once you get into this stage here, there's no stopping this cycle. That cycle is going to go around one more time. Every single time this cycle goes around, you destroy trust, you destroy your capacity. It's getting worse and worse, essentially. Okay, it gets worse and worse. So it's this mistake here right now. This idea that now there's a time you can have a conversation. There's a time you can actually have a conversation, but you have to know how to read for timing when it comes to this, right? Those questions, they're reasonable, right? They will in fact feel reasonable, but fear is driving you, and that's a problem. The driving force behind your actions is much more of something you should pay attention to rather than the actual action, because ultimately it's what's creating the cycle. Because remember, there's a cycle going on here, right? So fear has given fear it's basically it's forcing the whole thing. Okay, all right, it's creating the force. And let me tell you something. It's you know how people talk about intentionality all the time. Intentionality. You don't need would need intentionality when you have fear. Fear doesn't need your help. Like fear is easy. All of us have fear. What do I mean by that, right? Just the idea that you are actively always seeking certainty and guarantees, right? What's the flip side of that if you think about it? You have the fear that tomorrow is not sure. You have the fear that this person is going to pull the rug from under you. That's where the idea of powerlessness comes from, uncertainty, right? So the other person is driving you seemingly, they might just be as confused, if not much more confused than you. So now you have an opportunity to create a better environment, right? But what do? You want to have a conversation about the marriage, the same marriage that is creating pressure that they are actively resenting right now, which is making you resentful because out there they are resentful about the marriage that they use their own hands to sign, right? It's resentment all around, right? So who is going to rise above the bullshit and fix all of this? Who is going to do it, right? Who is waiting for who? Remember waiting? Who is waiting for who? Can you see how waiting is turning to pressuring and then turning to. Can you see how all of this started? It started with your interpretations of life events. When you feel like you're in a crisis, it's a marriage crisis obviously going on, right? Do you have the capacity to carry that? Or what are you going to do? You're going to drive it further and further into a ditch. And that's the easiest thing to do because naturally you're looking for certainty. And that certainty is creating the wrong impact. Your intentions is to fix the marriage. I was in this same emotional place. Okay. Like I said, I packed my bag. I went over to my parents' house. I sat outside for nearly 2 hours. For nearly 2 hours before I could walk inside to finally break down on my father's shoulder, crying like a baby because I was confused. Actually, I didn't know what to do with it. I broke down. And that crisis had become larger than her behavior. It was no longer about her behavior at that point. I was the real after when you cry and then you let that energy out and you have like a sudden clarity. And then I realized like this is not even about her. Like what the hell, right? But guess what? I was just being human, but there was a lot more at stake. I had two boys at what, like two children, right? Our two children, and we had 8 9 years marriage at stake at the time. My business was not in the best of places at the time too. So what had happened was I had not developed the capacity to hold the pain without letting it run me. It was running me. That was the reality. And I had to snap out of that. All right. So pressuring leads into shrinking. Mistake number 4 is making the marriage crisis your whole identity. Okay. Again, this is not judging you. It's what's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, you wouldn't know what the other side looks like. I'm going to talk about that in a second here. Making the marriage crisis your whole identity. Let's see here. We're gonna get into the personal power cycle in a second. All right. Making the marriage your whole identity. All right. The more you need her decision, the smaller your world becomes. You're shrinking. Your purpose becomes save the marriage, right? Your morning mood depends on how she acts. Your confidence depends on whether divorce comes up today. Your future becomes one long reaction on her. And this is why you flip into chasing and you start begging and pleading and apologizing, even though you haven't really properly identified what you did wrong. Well, I don't know. It depends on what you did wrong. Some of you have cheated, so we're not gonna pretend like, oh, this marriage just fell into limbo. We're just talking about the indecision, okay? We're not gonna pretend like you just find yourself here by mistake, right? And shrinking leads to even more powerlessness. You see, I'm teaching you right now the universal roadmap, right? But every marriage has its own unique hidden landmines. Your wife saying she wants divorce but refusing to file or leave can look like the main issue, but underneath that limbo is so many things. It could be like so many things, right? Attraction loss, resentment, fear, financial concerns. That's a major, major, major big deal. If you don't have your money right, that will make any partner feel insecure, feel lack of safety, or don't feel safe with you normally, right? So it's something you have to keep actively work at. That's really on you, not really on her. But again, your environment will feel some type of energy because of that, right? So you have to be willing to acknowledge that. What about attachment, unresolved betrayal? Like I said, let's not pretend that all these things happen. People betray themselves when they start living together. You spend 5 years together with another. It doesn't matter if you're a man or woman. It doesn't matter if there's been actual infidelity or adultery. You've betrayed the other person. Either you know it or not. Just, in fact, the more they haven't spoken about it, the higher the chances you've betrayed them. Some people are just, they handle that more quietly, right? And or they may not outrightly tell you it's betrayal in words, but that's what they feel. And the feelings, it's all that matters, right? Nobody cares about anything outside of their feelings. Something you can write down and take to the bank, right? It might be separation, uncertainty. It might be a completely different pattern. Everybody's story is different. And if you want me to look directly at your situation before, let me just say this real quick. If you want me to look at your situation, just go to getmymarriageback.com, because what I will do is I will look at the specific blocks that created the dynamic where you are right now. And the link is also pinned into the description box. Some of you are realizing that her failure, for the first time, you're realizing that her failure to file is not the actual issue. The issue is identifying the pattern that is making you hand your personal power over to her indecision. And that's exactly what we do in the discovery session. So just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery and we will take it from there. All right. Now, if you cannot control whether your wife files, leaves, stays, or changes her mind, what does saving your marriage actually look like from the side of the relationship you still control? What does that look like? All right, so let's get through now. You don't get your power back by finally getting the answer you want from your wife. All right, in fact, sometimes that's a setup for failure, because what she's going to tell you is just how she feels right now. It's another trap you want to avoid, right? You get your power back by becoming capable of being able to lead yourself. Okay, being able to lead yourself before the answer arrives, even if it never arrives. Because remember, there's no guarantee in life. The only form of certainty you're going to get, joy, happiness, fulfillment, is going to have to be sourced from inside. It's already inside. You just have to know what your power is. That's why I really need to show you this, right? That's why we call it the personal power cycle. You see, he didn't say the shared, both of you must share, must go out on the date type of, no, none of that, because at the end of the day, you are an influential person in that relationship, and you have to know how to use your power. Okay, so from powerlessness, all of this is still triggered by powerlessness, right? We are going to go in the direction of grounding. Okay, grounding. Okay, now the idea of grounding, not an idea by the way, the principle of grounding is a part of our 3 core pillar. Okay, we have something we call the 3 core pillars, GPS. All right, so I'm gonna give you this. If you have this and you know how to implement it, if you know how to implement it with respect to your story, your specific story, your problems are solved. It's magical. It's immediately solved for, right? Now, like immediate relief. Okay, so pay attention very carefully. Okay. First, you return from panic. Everything that's going on with your marriage right now, naturally you have panic and you have fear that this might be the end, right? The idea is you want to return from that place of panic to your higher self. Okay, grounding stands for God, for gratitude, right? God in the sense of your higher self. Okay, God, I said God, God in the sense of your source of truth, right? God not as the person who is always right, who never gets angry. Even the scripture never describe God as never get angry. Okay, God in the sense of you've identified that there's some things you can control and there's some things you can't control, and you're going to be a God in your own right and focus on the things you can control. which means you are able to focus on your ability to influence around you. How do you do that? You have to find out what your points of leverages are, right? Or your points of leverage. You need to find out what they are, right? So grounding means to find your footing, right? There's an actual crisis going on. There's an earthquake, right? The floor, the actual floor you're standing on is shaking. So you're going to look for a footing first. You're gonna have to sometimes put your hands on the ground or whatever, so you can find a stable place, right? You assess the situation before you react, right? But your source of truth is coming from inside, not society, not, is coming from a source of truth that is going to stay the same all the time. Because if your source of truth is all over the place, like for example, your wife, right? Let's say, she's indecisive because that's what's creating your uncertainty, right? You're no longer making that your source of truth. You go back to grounding. Understood? Now, this is easier said than done. This is the hard work that you need to do because, some of you've been watching this, and for every case, for every situation, grounding will look different. Because I'm never asking you not to fight. In fact, I'm always asking you to fight for your life, but you have to know how to fight. It's about skills. If you don't know how to fight, you're just going to get slapped from a blind spot every single time. Eventually, you're just going to get bruised up, and then it's going to be a knockout if you don't know how to fight. But you must find your grounding. You need stamina. Okay? The idea here is never to fight the person you're still married to, the person you love. You want to save the marriage? Obviously, you don't want to be fighting them. But fighting is always going to be, somebody said, no, why do we have to fight if this should be easy? Like, then you don't understand life. Because in life, anything that's worthwhile will require work, will require effort, will require pain. Okay, speaking of pain. Now, powerlessness is not as simple as just powerlessness, right? The panic, the fear is coming from a real place of pain. Remember the story I just told you? I broke down. It was painful. It was a painful experience to go through, but we're not just going to just say pain, right? What do we do with this pain? This is what winners do, right? They look at this situation, they say, wait, this is painful, but this must mean something. Interpretations. Remember interpretations? You have the power to interpret life events. Okay, what am I going to do with this pain is a better question. Do you have the capacity to flip this pain into attraction, right? Because once your partner once they're attracted to you, everything becomes easy. They help you. Okay, attraction. We're going to come down to attraction. Okay, once we're trying to make our way to attraction, curiosity, precisely an attraction, right? Once you start building attraction, right, everything becomes easy. Remember the word I just used, leverage. I just used the word called leverage, right? Leverage is you know what you can control, what you can't control. And the winners in this life, they don't try to own anything or people, or they don't try to control another person, which is a form of trying to own another person. They just control what they can control, and that creates influence, right? And that creates curiosity, that creates attraction, right? So how do we flip this pain? The idea is that we need to flip this need to go from pain to curiosity, and right. So the cards you're dealt in this life, how do you turn lemons into lemonade? That's what I'm trying to teach you. Okay, now again, everybody's story is going to be different, but that's what we're trying to do. Everybody else except you will play a victim, or they will get stuck in victimhood, however way you feel better to say that, right? But you will see this is a painful experience, and I'm going to show you how to flip this into pain. Now, going from here to here is going to require another P word. Winners understand that this is not going to happen without a process. Everybody else, majority of humanity, will basically say they deserve better without going through the process. But what is the process? Grounding. Okay. Now we go from grounding to purpose. right? Without pain, you can't say purpose. The word purpose does not exist without pain because you don't have a frame of reference. There is no light without darkness. If you haven't gone through your present experience, you don't know what, yeah, like you don't know what purpose is, right? Purpose is birthed because you've gone through that pain. So you realize that you have to be intentional. And you're going to actually flip that pain into purpose. You understand? Your entire life has been waiting on your wife in the past 3 years for her to decide, right? That purpose has been replaced by suspense if you're doing that. Because you can still fall from any part of this back into the previous cycle, the toxic cycle I showed you earlier on, right? That decision limbo cycle, you can easily fall back into that because it's easy. Right? It's easy to play a victim. It's easy to feel like a victim if you're actually a victim. It's easy to see how the world is not happy with you, how the world is just falling apart for you. That's easy. That's your feelings. They're valid. But you're going to be intentional, right? We're going to go from grounding into actual purpose for the first time in your life. Purpose makes your world larger than the marriage crisis itself, than the marriage, period. Your purpose means your life is bigger than the marriage, is bigger than you. It's your reason why you're here on earth. You have to have a reason, something, how the kind of impact you're going to leave in this life. If you've ever had it, you've disengaged from it because your world has been about the marriage crisis. Your whole identity has been about the marriage crisis. If you don't save the marriage, your life depends on it. And then you wonder why they feel pressure. That's a lot of pressure for another human being to carry, by the way. Okay. So what do we do when you engage your purpose again? You re-engage your work, your life work, particularly, not necessarily what you go to job to do, 9 to 5, right? You engage your health. Yeah, your personal health. Like, what do you think? Like, you should take care of yourself, right? You re-engage your faith, your contribution into this experience, right? You've disengaged from those meaningful things that used to make you feel fulfilled. It was natural to do that, but when you're in a place of crisis, you fell apart like a pack of cards. You couldn't handle yourself. So you find yourself in this place where you could no longer be creative. Your creative abilities is gone because all you can think about is saving the marriage. Your identity is all wrapped up in this situation right now. Naturally so. So we're going to snatch your life back from that. Okay? Now, you're not going to wait for her to give you an answer of where she stands. That's her life. Okay? You're going to find yourself. So purpose is going to lead to self-discovery. You see? Self-discovery. Somebody said, oh, you should discover yourself first before you get married. There's no such thing. It doesn't exist. Okay? If your plan is to get married, that doesn't exist. Because there's parts of you you're going to discover, and only after you've been married, only after you've gone through the ups and downs of marriage. And that is not a bad thing. That's anything in life, not just marriage. Okay? You're not going to know how you're going to operate, how you're going to function until you find yourself in a place of crisis. Okay? Once you start discovering yourself, you stop investigating our indecisions because you're going to influence that. You're not going to try to control that. You now know that that's not where your power lies, right? And so don't worry about it. Just focus on what you can control. Focus on becoming a better version of yourself. That's self-discovery, right? You start discovering your own capacity. It's always been there, but you've tucked it away because that rejection made you do it. Let's blame it on the rejection, on the power, on the feeling of powerlessness, right? So why does uncertainty make you chase? Those are the questions you start to ask when you start to discover yourself. Why does it make you beg? Why are you feeling the need to explain and complain? Why do you feel the need to do that over and over? Sometimes you do, but if you find yourself doing that over and over again, why? What is it about you that's so weak that feels the need to over explain yourself? Right? And that's a lot of energy. That energy could be best applied to rebuilding yourself. Why does waiting make you abandon your own personal self-development routines? Right? Why is it that you keep drifting back to that? Right? To just panic and fear that maybe, and then what happens? Like, You don't have the confidence of, maybe I should call a family meeting, right? What happened, right? So self-discovery is not self-blame, by the way. It's never self-blame. It's never a place of guilt, right? You can feel guilty, that's natural, but I'm just telling you, you want to kind of talk, um you want to get a control of that, right? We're talking more so self-discovery. Self-discovery is the result of you going back to grounding, engaging your purpose. And now, once you engage self discovery, naturally, you're going to create value. Okay. You're going to create a brand new type of value that you didn't know exists. Now, you need to see the value. Once you start seeing the value, other people need to see the value. This is not the value where we say, I know myself. I don't need to change myself for anybody. No, that's not what we're talking about. That's pride. That would be pride talking. Pride is negative. Pride destroys everything in its path, even if it's not intentional, especially the covert type of pride, the one that's not necessarily, it's not obvious, right? So I'm talking about value. Yeah, you see the value, it's self-value. It means you also understand you have to keep taking care of it, but other people start to see it. Do you understand? When other people start to see that value, guess what? They start becoming curious. That is attraction happening in real time. Make sense? That's attraction happening in real time. And that's where you're trying to get to. Why? Why do you need attraction in all of this? Because you're never going to be perfect. You're a human being, right? And sometimes you make a mess, right? But it's easier for them to forgive you. It's easier for them to let you slide when they are attracted to you. Where's this thing? Okay, there you go. Right? Because in life, you're still going to sometimes feel powerless. Life events, things are happening and stuff like that. You're going to sometimes feel that, but you know exactly what to do after that. You go back to grounding. You go back to continue to build your purpose. You continue to discover more. For every crisis you go through, because it's not just marriage crisis that exist in life, you're able to self-discover, you're able to create more value. That creates curiosity and attraction. Okay, that means they're helping you. Once you hit this stage, remember what I showed you earlier. This stage right here is, hold on a second. Curiosity and attraction. Once you get into this stage, the cycle continues. It gets easier. Just like if you hit pressuring earlier, right? Once you hit this stage, there's no stopping the cycle unless you stop it, right? Unless you actually break the cycle. The same thing with curiosity and attraction. Once you get into a place where you're creating so much value, that should be your focus. This your focus. Value, not moral values. Okay, just because you're a good person does not mean you deserve it does not mean you deserve affection from your partner. Okay, they have to be able to see the value. It's not just you that can see the value. You see the value first, but they see the value. And then if you find yourself in any form of powerlessness, you navigate your way around again. For every time you navigate your way around this, you create trust, okay, in the relationship. They because you're showing up consistently. Change behavior consistently, create trust is the best form of apology. Make sense? So instead of you getting stuck in limbo, apologizing, getting defensive, complaining, explaining, you focus on the process of creating more value. You focus on that. It's a process. So sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, it's going to be effort on your end, but eventually it becomes like second nature. All you have to do is go through cycle a couple of times, and then it becomes second nature. And then you look back and you're like, wait, how did we get here? Oh, I know exactly how we got here. Yes, it's because you've been working on yourself. All right. So before we wrap up, let me leave you with this. If during today's lesson you find yourself thinking, he's describing my marriage, yes, it's because I'm describing your marriage. Okay. Don't go back to guessing. Knowing this decision limbo cycle and navigating the personal power cycle are easier said than done. For an average person, you need skills, you need support, you need a system. And when you have those three S's, they go a long way. Okay. Every marriage is different. That's the reality. Every relationship has its own history. That's why people say, oh, there's no manual. There is a manual. We have principles that work across the board all the time. But I understand some people are just trying to say every marriage is different. Well, just like anything else in life, it's different, but we create principles, we create standards based on patterns that we've seen over centuries. Okay, this is timeless stuff. Okay, and it works every single time. If you haven't seen it, you haven't seen it, but now you've seen it. But like I was saying, every relationship has its own history, its own personality, its own blind spots. And your wife saying that she wants divorce but she refused to file can look like one simple contradiction, confusion, but the pattern underneath it can involve resentment, attraction loss, attachment, fear, panic, avoidance, financial pressure, unresolved betrayal, infidelity, I don't know, separation, uncertainties. And another issue is this, right? Again, all those things you will need proper root cause analysis so that you can actually properly deploy this solution into your marriage. So, and that's why I offer the private 1 hour discovery session. We'll spend 1 hour looking at your specific situation, identify what actually created the crisis, so we can make sure that we're not just fixing on the surface, but actually fixing the root of the issue, and then helping you gain clarity on your next best step. All right, so if you're interested in that, just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. That's getmymarriageback.com/discovery. The link is also pinned into the description box. Listen carefully. You see, our failure to file is not proof that reconciliation is complete, and her divorce statement is not permission for you to surrender your personal power. Patience is not the same thing as putting your life on hold. You can pursue your marriage with dignity without chasing your wife for certainty. That's the tricky part about it, right? Your growth is not a performance thingy. It's not a performance that's designed to make you to make you chase after her choosing you. You have to be careful with that. It is the part of the crisis that belongs to you that you need to focus on. There's a full ownership that's necessary on your part. And when powerlessness returns again, if you're able to navigate this personal power cycle again, over and over again, even if, when powerlessness returns inevitably, because this is real life. Life is about ups and downs. So every time you need to elevate to a new level, you're experiencing a new low, and then you have an opportunity to create another cycle of trust, of safety, security, right? And when you know what I'm going to show you, you don't go back to waiting for her to regulate your life for you. You return back to grounding. You keep building your life, your capacity, your value, and you keep working on the things you can control. All right. So if this helped you understand what to do when your wife wants divorce but can't file, if it gets you some kind of clarity, please go ahead and like this video, subscribe, share with someone trying to save their marriage right now. Share with someone right now. And if you're looking for me, just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. Hopefully you've been enlightened, educated. Take care. God bless. Peace.
Are you fighting to save a marriage or a relationship, or simply avoiding to end up in a broken or toxic one?
We've been there, and you're in the right place. You see, inside this book, right, you will find and you will discover the secret to save a broken marriage, and you will learn how to build and attract the marriage of your dream.